Hello guys, welcome to this new video of our class of psycholinguistics. I want to emphasize on this particular order of topics that we took for the last 2 weeks. Remember that my intention was to uh, cover everything related to language acquisition so you could advance into your final project, okay? That is why I was dedicated to that particular topic. Mm, and the idea was that you were able to um, cover all those different subtopics and components, etc., so you could work on that. Hopefully, you're doing it. I have not received yet many questions about it, just a few. Mm, so I really hope that everything's going well, okay? As I mentioned before, we are going to return a little bit to cover a topic that is equally important, just it was not as urgent as providing all these context for the final project, okay? So we will return a little bit on the slides, and we will go back to the slide number 37, okay? We are going to deal with these three terms, or these three aspects of learning that are quite important, and they are called transfer, interference, and overgeneralization. Normally, every new problem that we approach, we use it, or we do it using this like a set of cognitive structures, and these cognitive structures are usually based in former knowledge, right? So this, let's say, phenomenon of transfer, interference, and overgeneralization, of course, is in consonance with Oswald's theory of meaningful learning, to the extent in which we require to take former advances or former ideas or resources, cognitive resources, in order to face these problems. As you can see, it also sort of relates or matches with Gagné's hierarchy of learning, in which the highest peak, let's say the peak of the pyramid, is problem solving. So everything's connected, right? Very well. Now, first of all, important to highlight what is mentioned over there in the slide, that these are three terms that are not separate, but they are part of a sequence, okay? They are associated to one another. Sometimes all of them happen, first one, then the other, then the next. Sometimes one of them is omitted, but well, they are pretty much associated in there, okay? Let's take a look at this definition that is over there, and we will discuss it. Yes, as usual, it has a lot of fancy vocabulary, but actually the idea is pretty simple, right? So they say that transfer is a general term describing the carryover of previous performance or knowledge to subsequent learning. Yeah, it may sound a little bit tricky, but it's actually really simple, yes? So carryover is like exactly that, like take something from one place to another. Yes, what is that something? Well, simple. Performing activity, so it means something physical, something kinesthetic if you want, or knowledge. Yes, so I use something that I already know, something from the past, in order to open up to new learning, to new knowledge, to new physical practices, and somehow that is going to help me learn something new. Yes. That is a transfer, right? Using something from the past to try to learn something that I don't know. Okay. Now let's say that we have a couple of characteristics of it, because this transfer can be positive, let's say good. It can actually help you learning something new. So that is what we know as positive transfer. When this all thing, all knowledge, all practice, all habit, all idea help us at least get into or introduce us into this new knowledge, right? So let's see the definition over here as well. It says when the prior knowledge benefits the learning task, that is, when a previous item is correctly applied to present subject matter. Again, in a little bit more elaborate words, it's when this previous knowledge that I have, when this former idea or intuition or habit that I had actually helped me. It helps me to acquire, develop a new knowledge in an easier way, right? So here I have a couple of examples, yes? So for example, knowledge in geography is used in biology, right? So knowing a little bit of geographical locations, the weather, what the trees produces somewhere, maybe the water fountains, the water sources, rivers, lakes, things like that. They can help us understanding better biology, photosynthetic processes, let's say behaviors of animals, the habits of the different, let's say, birds or carnivores or herbivores. Well, all these different things can actually help us to learn something new about biology, right? Skills and knowledge in mathematics used in business, of course, right? You require to know about percentages, about additions, subtractions, divisions, everything to calculate profits, to understand how, for example, investing in dollars can help you get more money or lose it. Knowing how a discount may be beneficial for you or not, all these different things, right? Knowledge of French may help a student learn Spanish, right? So French is a Romance language that is pretty close to Spanish in different senses, such as Italian, such as some other ones. This has the plus of having conjugation, so if somebody is learning Spanish and already knows French, it's going to be much easier to understand the idea of conjugation, right? Like for an English speaker, learning Spanish may be tricky, right? As they have very little amount of conjugations, as they have very little differentiation between genres, for example, right? Or well, some other things. Learning to drive a car helps a person to later drive a truck, right? So we have all these general ideas about the steering wheel, about the gearbox, about the general principles of driving that may be quite more complicated when driving a truck. But nevertheless, it actually gives some clues, some positive former experience that is going to help you somehow in being able to sort of acquire all these different things, right? And actually are going to contribute for you to learn this new skill that you require, okay? Very well, guys. So please close attention because the assignment of this week is going to have a lot of different parts, and I am going to be explaining such parts as we advance in the presentation, okay? So the first part of the assignment of this week is going to be the one described in the slide number 38, yes? So it says, what about second language learning? Yes, what about if you're native of Spanish and then you want to learn English? That is the closest example, I think, for you, but of course you can use different languages, right? So you're going to provide 5 specific examples of positive transfer when learning a second language. Explain each one of them, at least one line per example, okay? So you're going to try to think about some things that you learn from Spanish or that you learn as a Spanish speaker that definitely is going to help you or are going to help you when learning a second language. Again, the closest example could be English, but you can just give different examples. You're required to provide 5. So it can be one for English, the other for French, and you combine, or all of them of the same language as you prefer. Okay. The important thing is that this is a positive transfer. Okay. Remember that you can work in groups of up to 5 people. Hopefully, like each one of you can provide an example, and that would be a little bit fairer, right? Okay, very well. Now, what happens when this former knowledge that I have, when these former ideas and preconceptions, and if you want to call them prejudice, yes, what if they do not help me? Yes, what if they actually prevent me from learning, from having this task of acquiring new knowledge? What if they are actually an obstacle? Okay, so this is called interference. That will be like negative transfer, right? So let's take a look at the definition. It says occurs when previous performance disrupts the performance of a second task. I have an idea in the past, I have an intuition, and I try to imitate that because I think that that is the way it should be done in my new task, but unfortunately that's not the case. It is actually an interruption, it generates confusion, it generates that I have mistakes in the new aspect that I'm learning, right? So it says over here, the latter, so that happens, of the previous knowledge interrupting my new one, it can be referred to as interference. In that previously learned material interferes with subsequent material. A previous item is incorrectly transferred or incorrectly associated with an item to be learned. So we make associations, but those associations are incorrect. They are not good. Our intuition fails us in there, and actually complicates the process. And every time that I'm going to learn that, so there's something in my mind that tells me it should be done in a different way, and it generates this interference, right? So for example, let's take a look at these ones. Yes, let's check the first one. It says I am in New York since January, right? What is the mistake over there? Apparently it sounds kind of okay, right? Kind of good. Nevertheless, it's incorrect. Yes, according to the grammar in English, you are supposed to say I have been in New York since January, because it is a process that started in the past and has not finished. So you're supposed to use present perfect. What is the problem? The problem is that if you say this in Spanish, estoy en Nueva York desde enero, well, that's perfectly fine. Yeah, because you understand that even though you still are there, well, this is like the way in which we are supposed to say it in Spanish. Actually, if you use present perfect in Spanish, he estado en Nueva York desde enero, well, that's correct as well. But does it sound natural? Not as much, right? So a conception, a preconception of what you have in a certain language makes you translate the thing in a literal way, and it doesn't work as much, right? Now, the next one. I am visiting at sisters of my mom. Yes, I am visiting at sisters of my mom. What will be the mistake in there, right? Like, we have different ones. We know definitely that is not correctly said in English. But what is actually like the problem in there, right? Well, there can be many, no? But if I translate it into Spanish, like, estoy visitando a las hermanas de mi mamá, probably the mistake is that at is also used for a time, for example. Yes? You can say, for example, see you at 4 p.m. And you translate it as los veo o te veo o nos vemos a las 4 de la tarde. So you can incorrectly assume that the word at means a las. right? Uh, so that is another thing, no? Like probably you learned in your basic, let's say the first lessons of language when you learn the time, the numbers, that at is for it, right? Now, if you don't receive any clarification, it is perfectly natural to assume that at means alas also in that context, and then that will make you make mistakes. Now, let's go with the next one. She used to work in a hospital. Actually, she is a nurse, right? This is a little bit tricky. This will be something like: solía trabajar en un hospital. Actualmente, ella es una enfermera. But that doesn't make sense, no? Because if she used to work in the hospital in this moment, currently, she should be a different thing. That is pretty common. I guess that many of you still, at some point, had that problem of thinking that actually was actualmente, because I've been teacher in first semesters, in first levels of language centers, and that is pretty common, and people struggles to get rid of that assumption of thinking that actually is actualmente, right? So this is, as you can probably remember, called a false cognate. That are those words that are similar somehow to our native language, but well, they are really don't mean anything like it. Sometimes they mean something completely opposite, no? Sometimes they are also called, I have listened to some people calling them false friends, which is cute, but I don't think it's too technical, right? And then we go with the final one, that is, I went to the funeral to express my sympathies. Now, what would be like the mistake in there, right? Well, it sounds tricky, like, how is it like, fui al funeral a expresar mi simpatía, but sympathy usually is associated in Spanish with being funny or somehow joking or enjoying, or many things related to it, right? Well, it sounds like strange, right? Well, expressing sympathy or being sympathetic, well, it also has to do with condolences or feeling sorry for somebody or showing your empathy, right? Taking into account that in Spanish the word sympathy, simpatia, is usually used in another context, this can help us making us confused or things like that. So this is interference, when you have these former ideas, this former knowledge that may confuse you somehow. Yes? Now, here comes the second part of the assignment for this week. Yes? Provide 5 more specific examples of interference in second language acquisition. So basically, it's the opposite to the first task. 5 things that do not help you, but that actually confuse you. Yes? I guess that, again, English could be a really good source, taking into account your somehow your own experience, and maybe you can work with English and French, or only one, or any other language that you prefer. Okay, very well. So here we go with generalization and overgeneralization in the slide number 40. That actually is, let's say, pretty easy to get. And very briefly, I will refer to generalization. Yes, and we will concentrate on the overgeneralization, that is like the problematic issue over here. Now, so let's take a look at the definition. It says to generalize means to infer or derive a law, rule, or conclusion, usually from the observation of particular instances. Right. So basically, by sort of putting together different trends or different actions or facts that are specific individual, you eventually conclude something general, right? So you see a dog having 4 legs, and another dog having 4 legs, and another dog having 4 legs, and you see big dogs and small dogs, and friendly dogs and angry dogs, and all of them or most of them, unless they had an accident, have 4 legs. So you eventually conclude that all dogs have 4 legs, even if you have not analyzed and observed every single dog on the face of the earth. This individual observation helps you concluding a general thing. Yes, and this synthesizes learning and actually encompasses a big amount of information into a single conclusion. So that is generalization, and that is something that is desirable, something that you are somehow expected to achieve. Yes, remember the pruning thing, like the example that I gave you about getting burned with the let's say with the pod, and then getting burned with the iron and some other things, and you eventually forget that it is specific things, but you conclude that anything that's hot is going to burn you, right? So that's generalization, and that's desirable. Now, what happens when you overgeneralize? That would be the negative, let's say, side of generalization. Well, the thing is that sometimes in the process of learning, you analyze different individual facts and reach wrong conclusions. Yes, you reach incorrect generalizations. Yes, for example, here we have a couple of instances in which that may happen. The first one that is pretty, let's say, I think of logic. No, dogs are animals, and horses are animals as well, right? So sure, that is something that is true, that doesn't really have any problem in logic. No, dogs are animals, horses are animals, but the problem is when you make the last conclusion: horses are dogs. No, that is not the case. But it may be an assumption that you can do based on incomplete observation, right? So that's one possibility. It has to do with logic. Then the second one, it has to do more with grammar. No, it's walked. Okay, so that is the past of walk. Opened, the past of open. But then you can say, for example, goed or flied. Yes. Why? Because you see a trend that most of the verbs that probably you are studying finish in ed, and then you assume that it may be, all of them can be like that without the knowledge of differentiation between regular and irregular verbs. So that is an overgeneralization that may confuse you and not necessarily help you, right? We actually talk about this in language acquisition and how kids, like infants, make these mistakes even in their native languages, right? Because they overgeneralize. We have this one over here, such as John can't study. Same thing, yes? We are usually taught the structures of present, for example, and we're taught present simple, affirmative, negative, interrogative, with verb to be, then with other verbs different from to be. So normally with the auxiliary, what we do is to negate don't or doesn't, but we perfectly can make the mistake of using doesn't, can't, such as we can say he doesn't sing, he doesn't dance, he doesn't eat. Well, it makes perfect sense to continue the trend with it doesn't can or he doesn't can, right? So those are cases in which overgeneralization help us, prevent us to make the correct conclusions. Okay. So here we have some general, let's say, summary of what we have already mentioned. Interference and overgeneralization are negative counterparts of transfer and generalization. So one, like a couple of phenomena are desirable, the others are not. Interference of the first language in the second language is simply a form of generalization that takes prior first language experiences and applies them incorrectly. Yes? Interference in first language when we are learning a second one basically is a way in which generalization is not employed correctly. Overgeneralization is the incorrect application, a form of negative transfer, of previously learned second language material to a present second language context, right? So interesting how this overgeneralization has to do more with the second language than with the first language, right? It happens a lot that when we're just starting to learn a language, we use those first rules, but it's very common that we are perplexed or confused by exceptions or by different rules or something like that. So actually in those cases it is the same initial rules of second language, the ones that makes or creates confusion, right? All generalization involves transfer, and all transfer involves generalization. Those are reciprocal, let's say, elements. Yes. In order to have a transfer, I need to generalize a rule, and in order to generalize, I require to have a transfer as well. Yes, this is like a chiasmus for the ones who remember formas, right? Okay, guys. So that was it. That was it for this particular video. We will talk something really short about inductive and deductive reasoning in the next video. Okay? Thanks a lot. Bye bye. Hugs.